Greetings, we are in Senior English A, and our project today is to introduce you now to the second character of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales that we will now address. Let's just go over a bit of review. We have been introduced to Chaucer, that great father of the English language. Why do we call him the father of the English language? Because when he chose to write Canterbury Tales, he chose to write in English. And it becomes for us the high moment of what we will call then Middle English. You'll recall Beowulf, Old English, Chaucer, Middle English, Shakespeare, Modern English. Okay? So that's an easy declension on your notes. Again, Beowulf, Old English, Chaucer, Middle English, Shakespeare, Modern English. And an easy way to remember this is when you read Shakespeare, as we will here in a few days, and we look at Macbeth and Hamlet, two plays of Shakespeare. Just like when you were sophomores and you looked at JC, when you were freshmen you looked at R and J, those were plays where you were reading Shakespeare's actual language. There was no translation being provided for you. When we look at Chaucer, we're still looking at translation. Chaucer wants to introduce us to the people who will tell his stories. He does that in a collection of references that we will call for your notes, again, character sketches. Character sketches. That is to say, he will draw or sketch or describe characters, a certain number of them. And his plan originally was that each one of these characters would tell two stories, one going to Canterbury and one coming back. He died before he finished his project. Tragically, it's too bad because he was a great storyteller. Chaucer's two stories that we will deal with, Partner and the Wife of Bath. We've already introduced you to the Partner. You'll notice that we introduced you to his prologue and then to the actual story. We already pointed out to you that there is a relationship that occurs between the prologue of the character and the character's actual story. Okay? This engages then our minds in what we called already Chaucer's project. He has an agenda. He is going to be concerned about certain issues, and the way he addresses those issues then is through his satiric approach. I hope you have that term in your notes. His satiric approach, related to the use of satire, where he exaggerates, where he makes fun, where he tries to joke, where he says one thing and he means something else. There are two kinds of satire. Now, this is new intel, so you want to get this in your notes. When we look at satire in the West, in our tradition, we derive the concept of joking, satire, and writing from the Romans, the great Roman people. And there were two of these Roman writers who were very famous for their kinds of satire. You'll want to put them in your notes, spell them the best you can. The first is a cat named Horace. Horace, very famous Roman writer and essayist, and he uses satire. The second is a guy named Juvenal. Juvenal, both of these great Roman writers. Not writers that we today in normal classes read very much, but they had a tremendous influence on guys like Chaucer. There are two kinds of satire when we look at these two writers of Roman antiquity. The first, Horace, is what we will call for your notes gentle satire. By the way, all the information I'm presenting to you now, you can use in the paper that you're writing on Chaucer's use of satire to reach his intended audience. And I would recommend that some of this information be presented right there in the intro paragraph. Horatian satire, related to Horace. Horatian satire is gentle satire. It's to make fun of someone, and the person you're actually making fun of can laugh too. All right? In other words, it's funny for all parties involved. No one is going to be really offended with Horatian satire. To say of the nun prioress that she is by no means undergrown is a gentle way to say that she's a little bit larger. Okay? That's Horatian satire. That's gentle satire. He will say, for example, about her, she loves to speak French, but the French in the Paris style she does not know. What does that mean? She loves to speak French, but the French that they speak in Paris she doesn't know. Which means what? She doesn't actually know French. She has a few phrases of French that she likes to repeat over and over again. And the yokels, who do not live in France, they don't know that she doesn't know French. Oh, she knows French. Wow, she can speak French. Well, not so much. This is, again, just a gentle way, Horatian satire. This is a gentle way to say she's not what she always appears to be. But if you were to point it out to her, she probably would laugh. She would not be totally insulted. That's Horatian satire. Number 2, Juvenalian satire, over-related to juvenile. Juvenalian satire, brutal satire. This is wicked, mean satire. This is when you say it to your buddy, and your buddy goes, yeah, that ain't funny. But everybody else is laughing, but your buddy ain't laughing. Your buddy's like, you and I, we're going to have some words if you keep that up. That's Juvenalian satire. That is the satire that is going to make someone offended. Offended. Okay? Now let's just say it out loud for the paper that you soon will write. Chaucer will employ both forms of satire. He will write both Juvenalian or both Horatian satire. We already mentioned a classic example or two. But then he also will definitely use Juvenalian satire. The classic example of this from the general prologue is when he talks about that friar, and I pointed it out to you. There was a friar with us, a wanton one, and Mary. He was a real slut. You'll remember those lines. That is not going to be funny. The friar will not think that's funny. Many people in the church will not think that's funny. Lots of other students will find that really funny. In other words, it's Juvenalian in its approach. Now, you can admit already that the partner is what kind of satire? What kind of character does he create with this partner? This guy who says, I really don't care about how I save their souls. They can go to hell and go blackberry picking for all I care. What I want is their money. This is clearly Juvenalian satire, isn't it? This is not gentle. The partner would be very offended. And of course, church people were very offended at the creation of the partner. Now, we already pointed out Chaucer's project for our study involves 2. 1, his concern about the hypocrisy of the church. 2, what we turn to now. And what we turn to now is not the issues of the church, but rather the issues that we will call, for your notes, gender wars. Gender wars. Now, what do I mean when I use the term gender? Over relating to guys and girls, right? In other words, the relationship that goes on between men and women. In Chaucer's day, there's going to be a very clear understanding of the relationship between men and women. Let's work on my whiteboard for just a second. As I like to do often at 3A, I like to give you some other information that's not in your hymnal that can kind of help you here. The Greeks have 3 famous, notice I was talking about Romans, now I'm going to the Greeks. The Greeks have 3 famous philosophers. In order, the first one is Socrates, the second one is Plato, and the third one is, anybody remember? Aristotle. Aristotle. We want to write down that name now, Aristotle. Okay? Aristotle had a certain understanding of what we will call the great hierarchy of being or value. And the way he introduced this in his writings is to talk about a pyramid that looks something like this. The higher up you go in the pyramid, the more value. The lower you go, the less value. And we're talking about being, what we would refer to as ontology, the study of being. Who's most important? And then he did this, where he kind of thought about some lines, all right? At the top, he would put the gods, okay? Underneath, he put men, and underneath that, he put women, and beasts and all other animals and that kind of thing, all right? Now, for Aristotle, this kind of a declension, a hierarchy, for Aristotle, this was a very important word for him because he was a biologist. This is natural. Totally natural. I've often used our example of Ruthie's tree out in a courtyard for a good cause. For example, if I were to go out there right now and start screaming at that tree because I wanted it to turn into a Christmas tree, to an evergreen tree, to a pine tree, and I'm screaming at it, you would be certain of what many of you already know: the old man's lost his mind. And you would come up to me and say, but you don't understand. See, you don't understand. You can't yell at that tree. And I say, no, you don't understand. I don't want it to look like that. I want it to look like a Christmas tree. I want it to change. I'm telling it to change. Why isn't it changing? See, you would look at me and you would say this: you don't understand the concept of nature. That tree didn't choose to be that way. It is that way. And it doesn't matter what you think of it. That's just the way it is. That's the way it will always be. Well, how come? Well, for Aristotle, it's simple. Because the gods willed it to be that. It's that simple. It's just the way it is. It's the way nature is. Are you ready for this? To try to change that would be unnatural. Do you got me? Aristotle saw men and women and their relationship in the same way. Men run the world and tell women what to do. That is the way it is. Are you ready for this? It is natural. To ever imagine that you would try to make women equal with men would be, for Aristotle, unnatural. Trying to make women equal with men, for Aristotle, would be like trying to tell that tree to turn into a Christmas tree. It would be considered unnatural, and if you tried it, you would be insane, for Aristotle. Now that's his view. And he makes that argument in a number of different places in his writings. That's a good 300 years before the birth of Christ. We are at 1300. We're talking about 1,500 years at least before Chaucer. Aristotle has already said men are above women and tell them what to do. There it is. Simple. Done. To try to change in any way that view, for Aristotle, was unnatural. The church held the same view. You want to write that down? The church held the same view. Women are beneath men. Men have power over women to tell them what to do. There was even these kinds of strange rules about men have an obligation to, in fact, inflict pain on women with a stick if they do not do what they're told to do. And in fact, of course, you've probably heard some of that rule of thumb type of thing, that in houses there was a stick that couldn't be any larger than the man of the house's thumb. And he was allowed to use that stick to, in fact, whip the wife or the daughters, any woman in the house who did not do what she was told to do. Why does the man have the right to tell the woman what to do? The easy answer is, it's the way God made it. It's nature. No one's interested in whether you like the fact that Ruthie's tree is not a Christmas tree. It's just the way it is. Now, the fact that I'm giving this lecture and one or two of you are giving me a look like, dude, I can't even believe anybody ever thought something like that, tells you that obviously times have changed. Would you agree with me? Clearly times have changed. By the way, another word for men is the Latin term patra familias. Patra familias. The patra, the father, the leader. And so this view of Aristotle's became understood as the patriarchy. Now that's a term we use often today to describe this patriarchal view. By the way, you guys were all born in the 20th century, right? Right at the end of the 20th century. In the 20th century, this continues to be a huge war. I mean, think about it. We are fighting 50 years into the 20th century whether women have the right to vote. What are you talking about, whether women have the right to vote? Of course women can vote. Why couldn't women? No. Women can't vote. Only men can vote. Men make the political rules. Women get to live with them. Well, that's totally unfair. All those political laws, they affect women just like they affect men. Therefore, women should be able to vote too. No. Why not? Patriarchy. Do you got it? Patriarchy. All right? People who challenge the patriarchy we call, for your notes, feminists. That's the term we use, feminists. And the study of the challenge to the patriarchy we call feminism. Now, the feminist critique is a valuable one for us. It's so important. Hello, we have young ladies sitting in class with young men. Aristotle would say, what about that? No, absolutely no. The minute you let girls sit in a class with guys, they'll immediately start to think they're just as smart as guys. What do you mean just? Of course, they could be smarter. Whoa, way wrong answer. Aristotle said, did you not see my chart? Who knows more, men or gods? Aristotle says, that's a no-brainer. Gods know more than men. Who knows more than women? Men? Yes. Why? Because women sit beneath men. That's just the way it is. We're not going to ask whether you like it or not. It's just the way it is. And for anybody to try and change that, you are going against the will of the gods, or if you're in Chaucer's day, the will of God. In other words, if you are a woman or a man who tries to challenge this view, you could actually end up toast on a post or soap on a rope. The church can actually kill you, calling you are you ready for the complicated word? A heretic. You are going against the will of God. Easily the Christian church could make the argument from the study of the Bible. In the opening chapters of the Bible, who screws up in the Garden of Eden? And the easy answer for anyone studying the Bible is, you'll remember the story of Adam and Eve. They get placed in a garden. They get told, you can eat anything in the garden you want, but don't eat from a special tree. Eve is tempted to eat from that. That's what the story says. She eats from the tree. She gives it to Adam. Adam also eats from the tree. And when they get caught, they both get jacked. Interestingly, Eve gets jacked for eating from the fruit. Adam does not get jacked for eating from the fruit. You know what he gets jacked for? Listening to his wife. That's what he gets jacked for. You should have never listened to your wife. The patriarchy. Okay? So the Christian church will enforce this same view, that men make the rules, women are to keep their mouths shut and do what they're told. End of discussion. End of discussion. Now I turn to Chaucer. Chaucer has real issues with this view. You want to write that down. Chaucer has real issues with this view. Chaucer is not so sure that the patriarchy is as natural as Ruthie's tree is Ruthie's tree. He's not altogether certain of that. And he is going to create major controversy when he creates a woman called the wife of Bath. Bath is simply a city in England. All right, that's all. Bath is a city of England. In other words, she comes from the city of Bath. All right, and so through history, she has just been called, by Chaucer and those who follow him, the wife of Bath. Now, the wife of Bath will stand up, and she will introduce herself in her own prologue. And if right now you turn in your book, and you try and look for the pages that precede the wife's tale to read her prologue, you're going to see this much of that prologue there. How come? It's very controversial. For many years, our anthologies had a few of those pages, but they're very controversial pages, and I think your textbook company finally just decided, let's get rid of it. Why is it so controversial? Because Chaucer will create a woman who stands up in front of men and begins to talk, and this is what she says. Now, from this point on, I would be taking a few notes, just so that you can kind of reference what the wife of Bath's prologue is about, because you're not going to get to read it. You can go online and read it if you want to, but you don't read it out of your textbook. What does she say? She says two things. One, she says, let me tell you about myself, she says. I have been married 5 times. 5. And I can tell you one thing I know about marriage. It is a misery and a woe. Marriage sucks. She says, I've been married 5 times. I can tell you this. All my husbands are dead. All 5 of them died, she says. And I can tell you one thing I know about marriage. It sucks. And then the next thing she says is, I can hardly wait till I get my 6th husband. Like that. She's like, I'm looking for my 6th man. To which the partner's like, what are you talking about? And she says, let me tell you about my understanding of men. I want a man, she says, who will be both my debtor and my slave, and bear his tribulation, that means his pain, to the grave. Whoa! The partner speaks up and says, whoa, lady, I was actually thinking about taking myself a wife this year. Remember, partners is supposed to be celibate. I guess there won't be any marrying for me. She comes back at him. Here you have a woman, not only speaking to a man, but to a priest. And she comes back and says, why don't you just sit down and shut up, and I'll tell you all about it, if you'll let me talk. At that point, the partner's ready to get fired up, right? But the wife of Bath then will pause at the beginning of her introduction, her prologue, and she will say, but first I want to make sure that all of you understand, I'm only offering my opinions to amuse. I don't mean to upset anyone. Now Chaucer has to say this because he is about to become a serious iconoclast. Now there's an interesting word. Let's write it in our notes. Iconoclast. I-C-O-N-O-C-L-A-S-T. Iconoclast. Now if you're iconoclastic, what does that mean? Well, I like the word iconoblastic. It's an easy way to remember the word. Iconoclastic equals iconoblastic. It's like this. You pick up a large aluminum bat. You look at people's most sacred held views, and you take that bat and you go, psh, and you blast it. That's an iconoclast. Okay? An iconoclast is a person who looks at sacred views, views that are held to be important, and you attack them in some way. You go after them. Are you ready for this? Through the wife of Bath, a woman of Chaucer's creation. She didn't really exist. Chaucer will become the great iconoclast of the patriarchy. And the way he does it is amazing. This woman, Chaucer, of course, speaking through the mouthpiece of a woman, she will say, let me tell you what I understand about men. And let me tell you what I understand about women. Let me tell you how I used to control my men. And then she starts talking. And she will go through now, are you ready for this? In any anthology, the wife of Bath's prologue, when read out loud, takes almost 30 minutes to read. She goes on and on and on. And what she has to say, dude, it is dangerous today. Okay, it was really controversial when she says it back then. For example, right off the bat, she says, let's talk about sex, shall we? Right off the bat, she says this. She says, all of the women with us here in our assembly, they all know it. Women want sex as bad as men. They just have to pretend like they don't. Go ahead, ask these women. The only women in the group are who? Nuns. 3 nuns who are supposed to be good nuns and therefore have never hankied. So the wife of Bath right away is going to say some radical kinds of things. But then she says it more interestingly this way. Let me tell you, she says, how I used to control my men. She says, my men were always involved in worrying about me. They wanted to control me. But I wasn't going to be controlled. These men, they got no way to control me. And here's why. She says, let me just get it out of the way, and I'll tell you why. Women are way smarter than men. That's what she says. Men, she says, are really stupid. They're like sheep, they are. And they basically can be led around anywhere you want to lead them. She says, and you can kind of get a sense that as she's saying this, remember the entourage is almost all males, remember? And remember how many of those males define themselves through sexuality? Remember our friar, remember our partner, remember our slumber? Remember those guys, they like to hanky-panky with women. Remember what the partner says? I'll keep a jolly wench in every town. I want a woman everywhere I go, right? The wife of Bath turns it right back on him and says, here's the reason why men can control men, women can control men so much. It all has to do with sex. It's very simple. Let me tell you how I did it. She said, I knew my man was out in the evenings hanky-panky and around. I knew it. I knew it. So she said, I'd had enough of it. So one evening I come walking out in this slinky outfit on my way out the door. And my husband's like, whoa, 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 where do you think you're going? And she says, I'm going out with my friends and we're going to have fun. And he's like, not dressed like that. You get back in a bedroom right now. And she says, I ain't listening to you anymore. And she walks out the house. She says, oh, it was awesome. We went out and had the best time. She said, so much fun. We went around bar hopping. It was great. And she said, I knew after just a few minutes he was going to come looking for me, but there ain't no way he could find me. She said, if I want to stay hidden, I can stay hidden. There is no way he's coming after me. She said, but in the early morning hours, I come back home. And when I come back home, I come through the door. Absolutely I knew he was ready to jack me good with that stick. And so the minute I walked through the door, sure enough, he's sitting there just fuming. He's so enraged. He's ready to beat her bad when she comes walking through the door. First thing she does when he walks through the door, she looks at him. He gets up with his bat ready to hit her. And she goes, oh, thank heavens you're here. And he looks at her and goes, what do you mean I'm here? Of course I'm here. It's where I live. And she goes, oh, I'm so glad that you're here. I was so worried about you. He's like, what do you mean worried about me? Where have you been? She said, well, here's the thing. I left, and I know I was kind of dressed in a slinky outfit and everything, and I know I said some things. That's just because I was mad. And so I was gone only for a few minutes, and I came back, and you were gone. And then I spent all evening looking for you everywhere. I went to every bar. I thought, oh, no, he's probably messing around on me. It's all my fault. You haven't been messing around on me, have you? And he's like, well, no. Where were you? Were you at the bar? Did you go to the bar? Is that where you went? And he's like, me? No, I didn't. She's like, oh, I thought this relationship was built on trust. Okay, that's it. That is absolute. I pointed this out. Can you explain this one to me? Guy is totally into girl. Walks out the front door of the high school, sees her whispering in the ear of his best friend. He gets in the truck with her. He is not happy. She's like, what is wrong with you? What was that? He goes, what was that? That. I just saw that. What was that? She goes, what are you talking about? What was that? No, don't pretend like you didn't. I saw what I saw. You're whispering in his ear. What's up with that? And she says, what? You think? Oh, you think I thought this relationship was built on trust. Well, that is the end of that. We are finished. Now, all of a sudden, guys, can you understand this? Ricardo just smiles. All of a sudden, the guy starts apologizing for something he never did. He's like, no, I'm sorry, no. She's like, no, you didn't trust me. You thought, And the guy starts apologizing. No, I'm sorry, I should have never said. No, the guy apologizing for something. It's always funny when I say this. Guys are never laughing at this point. In my lecture, it's always the girls laughing. And then the guys are like, that isn't funny. What's funny about it? Where did they learn how to do this? Where do women learn how to do this to manipulate men? The wife of Pat does it like this. She's like this. I got him good. She said, that was awesome. The language she uses is, I built him a cross out of the same wood he would crucify me on. In other words, she says, I was smart enough to realize. She's not done though. She goes, oh, no, I got a better way than that. She says, how about the Visa card? Now, she doesn't call it Visa card. In Chaucer's day, you keep all your money in a coffer or a safe, and you only have one key, right? The guy... Our whiteboard, right? Yes. The guy, he gets to control the Visa card. Simple, right? How come? Because he's the guy. Aristotle said so. So she asks him this question. She says, by the way, since we're having this conversation, what's up with how come you get to have the Visa card? How come I can't have the key to the safe? Because it's a fair question. Are you going to, ladies, want a guy who says to you, honey, you look really tired. You need to just go to Billings for the weekend and just shop. Here's the credit card. You have fun. Or, ladies, do you want a guy that says, you ain't never getting none of this money? Which kind of guy? See, now I once asked this question. Gentlemen, are we going to give the ladies the credit card and send them to Billings? And the guy in the class didn't realize maybe he was speaking with his voice. Out loud said, hell no. That's what he said out loud. The next thing we know, there's this loud right across his face. It was the girl sitting right in front of him who had turned around to smack him right across the face. I'm not done with my story. They had been dating since they were freshmen, they were seniors, and a few weeks later were to graduate, and the plans were already to get Mary. Interestingly, no one had brought up the question of who gets the Visa card. And Chaucer brought it up. I got blamed. But it was really Chaucer, right? Chaucer brought it up, and she found out that he had a certain view of who gets the credit card. Her argument is great. She says, who is smarter, you or me, guys or girls? And he goes, men are smarter. And she says, I totally agree. And he goes, you do? And she says, yes, I do. And because men are smarter, they should have lots of patience. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. And he goes, yeah. And since you have lots of patience, we know that one of the two of us is going to screw it up and spend money when we shouldn't. Would you agree with that? So here's the deal. Because you're smarter than me, and you have more patience than me, I should be the one who gets the credit card, and I can screw it up, and then you have more patience to put up with me. Because I'm dumb and don't have lots of patience, and so when you screw it up, then I'm going to get way, way too mad. So, credit card. Because you're the smarter one and have more patience. Unless you want to argue you're not the smarter one and have more patience. And the guy's like, and he hands her up, and she does one of these numbers. That's how I take care of him. Amazing. I know the guys are like, dude, what is funny about this? Right. Well, come back tomorrow, and we will finish up with the wife of Bath. We'll finish with her prologue, and then we'll go to her tale.